What's up, guys? Squishy Pixels here, back with part 3 of the Chatbot website. And in this video, we're going to be setting up Flask and getting our users' input. Okay, so last episode, in terms of our Trello board, this is what we completed. We finished our front-end UI, and this is the final product that we have. But now we need to actually get into the backend. So the next thing we need to do is get the user input. Okay, so to get the user input and actually send it to the ChatGPT API, we're going to need to use Python, right? We can't just do this in regular HTML and CSS. And in Python, we're going to be using a certain dependency called Flask. And this is essentially just so we can connect with our web page using Python. Now, before we can do this, there are a few requirements that we need to do. So the way Python functions is we need a specific file structure, which I'll show on the screen now. The problem is right now, we have no folders in our project. So we need to quickly add those. What we can do is right click on our file structure and say new folder. And we can call this static. And note this must be called static with no spelling mistakes. And we can drag our style.css into this folder. We can now make another folder called templates. And we can drag our index.html into that file. And now finally we can click in the entire file structure, add new file and say app.py. And this is going to be where all of our backend happens. Before we can move on and actually continue coding our backend, we need to install the Flask module so it's inside of our workspace. To do this, you want to go to View on the top left corner and then click Terminal at the very bottom. Once this is open, we want to say pip install Flask. I'm going to skip to when this is continued installing. But once it's done, we should be able to use it in our program. Okay, so my Flask has completed installing, meaning I can start using it in my program. But I just want to show you guys one thing really quickly. So if we actually go to our live server now, it says cannot get /index.html. And this is essentially because Flask runs on routes. So for each web page that we make, we need to make a specific route for it so we can render it. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is actually import Flask into a Python file. And we can do this by typing from Flask import Flask. And the second Flask should be capitalized. So now what we can do is say app equals Flask underscore underscore name underscore underscore. And essentially what this does is it's creating a Flask instance. And like the next few lines of code that we're going to be writing as well is just some boilerplate code that every Flask file needs to actually run. So now what we can say is if underscore underscore name underscore underscore equals to main, then app.run debug equals true. Okay, so this is essentially the boilerplate code that we need for Flask. So now what we can do is we can actually make our first route. So to do this, we can say app.route, and inside of our quotations, we can just say slash. So as we make more web pages, we can say /a/b or whatever you want to call the web page's route. But since our web page is just index.html, which is the initial route, it's just going to be slash. Now we need to make a function so everything that happens in this route is stored in this function. So I'll call it def index just to represent that this is the index.html file. And in here, for now, I'll say return hello. Okay, so this entire time we've been running our files using the live server extension that we downloaded on episode 1. But now that we have Python incorporated into our project, we're going to be running them a bit differently. Every time you want to run your file, you're going to have to go to terminal and type in python app.py. And if you named your Python file something other than app.py, you would type that in here. Now, once you run it, a URL will be showed in your terminal. You want to click Control and then click this URL, or Command and then click it, depending on if you're on Mac or Windows. And it should launch this web page inside of your browser. So right now it says hello, and this is because we returned hello inside of our route. So we don't actually want to do this. We want to show our index.html page. And to do this, we're going to have to go to the top of a file, and where it says from Flask, import Flask, add a comma and type in render template. So now we're also importing render template, and this is Flask's way of showing HTML files that you have created. So now instead of typing return hello, we're going to type return render template index.html. So now if we control C in our terminal and reload our server by typing in python app.py, now if we go back to our web page, we can now see that we have the web page loaded up and the index.html that we made last video is now here. But it looks a bit wonky, and this is because it doesn't actually have any CSS applying to it. And let me explain. So our index.html file, inside of here, it links to style.css. But now that our style.css is in the static folder, we want to type in static / style.css as our new route. And now if we again reload our server, we can see that it is completely back to normal, just like it was last video. But now we have a Python file incorporated into our project. Okay, so all Flask routes have two types of methods. They have get methods and they have post methods. So get methods is when you're calling something. Like you could be calling data, you could be calling stuff from your database, and that would all fall under the category of a get method. There's also post methods, and this would be when you're sending something. So let's say I click a button, and if when I click that button, I am sending data to a database or I'm sending it to an API, that would be a post method. So if we want to add both of these methods to our index.html Flask route, so what we're going to do is go to our app.route line, and over here, make a comma and say methods equal, and then inside of a list, say get and post, both capitalized. Okay, so now that we have both of these methods built into our route, we need to make specific actions for both of them. So first we need to check which method we're actually doing. So what we're going to do is go to the top of a file in all of our imports and add another one called request. And then in our route, we're going to say if request.method equals get. So that means if a get method is happening inside of our browser, then what should we do? And for now, we don't have to do anything other than just render the web page, because that's the initial get method. So we'll just keep it like that for now. However, if request.method equals post, and this means that we're actually clicking a button or doing something. So in this case, there's a bit more complexity, because if we're clicking the submit button, we need to get all the information from our website and store it inside of our Flask. So the way we're going to do this is going to our HTML file here, and the place where our input box is, which in this case is over here, we're going to set all of this inside of a form tag. So if you just type in form and then tab, and then click enter, Now it's in a form. Now we have a form tag. So we're actually going to remove where it says action, and instead we're going to say method equals post, because this is going to be sending data to a Flask. So now we can copy all of this div inputs that we have and paste it in here. So now there's only a few more edits we have to do. So first, in our actual text box, we have to make a name for this text box. So over here, we can say name equals input item. And this basically means when we call it inside of a Python file, we will reference it as input item. And then for our button here, right now the button type is button. We're going to change this to submit. Okay, so that's basically all of the edits that we're going to need to do in our HTML file. Okay, so now moving back to our app.py, we can make some modifications here. So if the request.method is post, and that essentially means the user has typed in their response or typed in their message, and now they have sent it. So we need to get this response and then store it in a variable. So we can say input item equals request.form.get input item. So I'll quickly explain this line. I made this variable input item, and it's equal to request.form.get, which is just getting the response from the form tag that we created, and we're getting input item. And if you recall, input item is the name that we made for this input box over here. And just to make sure that this works, we can print input item as well. So now the final thing that we have to do here is we have to type in return render template index.html. And this is just so after the form has completed, the code knows where it needs to redirect us. So now if we restart our live server and we open it up, we can see that the CSS has been messed up just by a little bit because of the form tag that we added, but we'll ignore that for now. So if we just type in like something like this and then click submit, then if we go over to our app.py, we can see that this actually gets printed in our terminal, which means we have now successfully called all the data and stored it in our variable. Okay, so the final thing that I'm going to do in this video is just fix up the CSS. After we added the form class, we can see that our input box has become a lot lower than it used to be, pushing it off of the screen. And also our submit button is now way smaller than it used to be. So there's actually a pretty easy fix to this, which is just going to our style.css, and in this .inputs div, instead of making height 100%, which is constantly clashing with new elements we add, we can just make height auto, and that way it'll keep changing depending on what we add. Also, instead of making this transform translate y, we can use position absolute. And this is like position relative, meaning we can manually change how much we are moving in each direction by, but it's a bit different because this time it will always be fixed in that location, and that way even if the device on changes, the location will never change. And that's why it's more commonly used in programming. So we can say position absolute and then top 80 or 90%, so it's very close to the bottom of the screen. Also, this .input box, now that we're using a height auto, instead of using a percentage, we can change this to around 60 pixels, I'd say. And we can do the same with the button in our index.html over here. We can say height 60 pixels. Now if we reload our page, we can see that this looks a lot more similar to what it looked like before. And just double checking again, we can type in whatever we want, and when we click submit, it does in fact show up in our terminal. So yeah, If you've been following to this point, then you have been successfully able to call the data that the user is entering. And next video, we will be working on sending this data to the API and getting a response and then showing it. So if you guys have been enjoying the series up to this point, make sure to like and subscribe and stay tuned for more upcoming videos. Aside from that, have a good day and peace.